Welcome to the Elokus podcast. This is class number Chodsheichem, which is the ninth discourse in the overall book, B'Shashek Dimu 5672. And this is going to be the second class in chapter 33. Actually, just began 33 in the last class, but let's go back. We're learning now. After we've developed in the last Maamor the three stages that there is in the Or Pnimi and the internal light, how it evolves first, how it initially is absorbed in its source in the Or Ein Sof, the state of the Esa Spheres Agnuzos, the state that he also, which means the 10 hidden spheres of attributes, the state which is also referred to as Nakuda, a point. Then the next stage is when they go out. And also, all the connections. He referred to that stage as Antuchad, you are one, because over there you don't feel any differences between the Sphirot and the attributes. Once they come outward after the Tzimtzum, after the contraction, but before they settle in the vessels, at that state, they are no more in a state of Chad, no more in a state of one, because there's already many, but you can't really determine the character of the spheres because they all look the same. Why? Because it's a state of Esa Spheres Belima. They don't have any substance, which means you can't notice yet the characteristics of the 10 of Chachma, of wisdom, of Chesed, of kindness, and so on and so forth. That at that stage we call it also a kav, a line, because a line is made up of many dots. So on the one hand there is many, but on the other hand, the many, each one is just a point, which means it's not yet revealed what it is. So it's a very abstract state. And then finally, the final state is when they come into the vessels. When they go into the vessels, that the vessels bring out the limitations and the definitions that is already in the light. They taint. In other words, it's not really tainting. The light essentially has these very has leanings to these various different sphirot. That's the idea of it being an Or Pnimi, an internal light. It's not yet you grabbing the pure infinite light and then coloring it. It's a light that from the very origins is meant to be received in a vessel, which means it has a slight design, but design was never noticed until you get to this stage where the light goes into the vessel and the vessel brings forth and pulls forth the definition of the light. And then that's called shetach, that's called already a space, because you have already the space, the lights have gone into a state of mitzius, in a state of somethingness already. And then they are, as he described, that's in a state of islapshus, enclothement, and then the light is kfi oifen hakelim, and the lights become like the state of the vessels. That is what we learned in the earlier chapter, in the earlier Maamor number 8, and here we begin to explore Maamor number 9, chapter 33. Let's start over again, the beginning of chapter 33. The heading of the discourse, which is the connection to the parsha that we did in the earlier class. This is also the reason of the division, the Mailo Mata, up and down. That and there is in the 10 spheros. Here is where you start a process of a hierarchy. There is a whole chain of higher and lower. Because prior to this, even though there is 10, the 10 stand equal. There's no higher quality. Highest sphera, which is the light of Chachma, and the lowest sphera, which is the light of Malchus, is absolutely equal before they go into the Kalim when they're still in the level of Keser. There is no differentiation between them when they're still above the Kalim. It's only in the vessels is where these differentiations happen. Should I ask the spheres that Atzilos, because the 10 spheres of Atzilus, the 10 spheres, Atzilus, and Atzilus, they're already in the world of emanation, which means they've already settled into a world. There is already vessels, there is already containers. Then, then there is an up and there is a down. Because wisdom is above, and wisdom is considered elyon, it's considered high, it's the highest sphera. Higher even than bina. Bina is comes second right after chachma, yet chachma is far superior than bina. And in general, the Hamochin, and in general, the three upper Sfirot, which are the Chabad, the Mochin, which means the intelligence, is higher than the emotions. And the Mochin and the intelligence is higher than the emotions. Until we get to Malchus, which Malchus is below the emotions. Malchus is generally associated with behavior, with speech, mainly with speech. And speech is just a vehicle to express the emotions. Far more limited entity speech are letters as opposed to emotions, which have a far greater expansiveness than just words. Letters are very fixed. So in this state of when the lights go into the vessels, that's when the lights become limited in accordance to the vessels. And the more, as we're going to learn today, the more refined the vessel is, the more expansive the light can be, the more intense the light can be. So the more elevated vessels receive a greater light, and the more coarser vessels receive a lesser light. And because it's only in this state where the lights interact with the vessels, that's the reason why we're going to have this whole measured lights, where the lights are higher on one level and lower in the next level. Adam Malchus, until the Malchus Shusayfid the Kol Dargan, which is the end of all levels, the Atzilus, of the world of Atzilus, Nikra Mata, it's called below. It's actually also the source of the idea of high and low in physical space. The Chachma is on the top, and Malchus is the floor, the bottom. The Ba'or Ein Sof Atzmus Mahus, because when we're dealing with the Or Ein Sof, which means above the world of Atzilus, generally is called Or Ein Sof. Yes, of course, we discussed many levels between Atzilus and the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, of course. But in general, higher than Atzilus is Or Ein Sof, because Atzilus is where worlds begin. And the world begins means there's already some kind of a limitation. So the Ba'or Ein Sof Atzmus Mahus, because in the Or Ein Sof, the very essence of him and his substance, whatever that means. Lo yesh inyan ma'lamata. There is no up and down. As stated in Eitz Chaim from the Arizal, B'tchilasa, all the way in the beginning, Terem shenetz to one etzalim, before the emanations were emanated, Hoya or elyon pashut, there was a simple light that was simple, that filled the entire Metzius, and there was no up and down in that light. It says explicitly in Eitz Chaim, there wasn't higher, there wasn't lower, there wasn't Rosh, there wasn't a beginning, the Saif, and there wasn't an end. But in the Essa Spherois, once we enter into the range of the 10 Spherois, Yashes Chalkos Ma'ilomata, vision and the separation between up and down. And that is, since the 10 Spherois are in a state of Slapshos, in a state of enclovement. What does that mean? Slapshos pnimi, an internal enclovement, oiros bekelim, not kelim, in the vessel, meir b'ma'or, since the light and the compatibility between the vessel and the light. Because the idea of an or pnimi is that the light reveals itself to the vessel and in the vessel, expresses itself in the vessel. For that, the vessel needs to be a vessel, which means it needs to be able to facilitate the light. The more refined something is, the more, like on a refined human being, you can give them a more sophisticated, deeper teaching. A coarse human being, you have to speak to them very coarse language. Right? A refined human being, you can say it's not elegant, to do that on the street. You don't have to run over and yell at the person. You definitely don't have to put him into handcuffs. You can speak. You can environment to behave that way, and a soft communication works. The person is very dense and coarse. They're just going to spit in your face if you try to speak to them. So you need to tell it to them loud. Sometimes you need to shout. Sometimes you need to put them in handcuffs. The person needs a beat down in order to get the message. And that's because the coarser the vessel, you have to speak a coarser language, communicate a message. So the same is all the way up. Even in the divine attributes, the vessels are compatible with the lights. So the more refined the vessel will be, the higher the light, and that means the more light can shine, the more abstract light can shine. The alken, and therefore hakeli shubachan is dakus, the keli, the vessel that is very refined, veruchnius, very elegant, veruchnius yaiser, and more spiritual. Meir boy or beribu yaiser. So in that vessel can shine more light. In general, he doesn't going to say that right now, but just like physically, the head is the most refined vessel in the human. We learned about this all the way in the beginning of the book, in the first Maamor, second Maamor. Remember, we were learning a lot about how the body facilitates the powers. So the brain is a very, very subtle. It's a very, very fine vessel. It's simply made up of a very, very fine tissue, or whatever you call, very, very fine physicality, and therefore the lights that can the its most sophisticated, its most elevated energies, but of the organs of the body, the coarser the light, the energy of the soul that manifests is not as sophisticated, is not as powerful, it's diminished. The feet are very coarse. So even though the soul manifests, the powers of the soul go into the feet, it's more just a simple power of to walk, to move, but to run, maybe you can refine it a little bit. You can do delicate dancing and acrobats. And people that work in the circus can do very fine movements with their feet, or dancers, or whatever it is. But that, again, that becomes through the work of refinement, exercising, and a lot of practice is refined the muscles of the legs and so on and so forth. But in general, compared to the head, the feet are coarse. So just like it is in a human body, same is also in the spheros of Atzilus, which is also, it's called God's body. So the feet, which is the Malchut, is much coarser than the head, which is the Chabad. The vessels of Chachma Bina Das are far more refined, and therefore they can receive a much greater, higher light that is shining in them. But over here, he's going to take it into a very abstract world immediately. He's going to start showing us in this chapter over here, we're going to learn the difference. First, he's going to begin in the mochen itself, in the powers of the intelligence itself. He's going to show how the keli, the vessel of chachma, is much higher than the vessel of bina. The vessel of chachma, which means wisdom, is higher than the vessel of bina, is more refined, and therefore the light that shines in the experience of chachma, whether by us or up there in heaven, in the highest level. But he's going to give an example from the human experience first. The lights that shine in chachma is far more brilliant and a much brighter light than the light that shines in Bina. Bina, the lights are already far dimmer because the vessel of Bina is coarser than the vessel of Chachma. And then that's what he's going to first discuss in the earlier part of the chapter. And then he's going to take it to the emotions. He's going to show a lower level that in general, the Chachma, the Bina, which means the intellectual faculties, in general are far more refined than the faculties of the emotion, of the heart. When over here it's already emotions in general. He's not speaking so much in physicality over here. He's speaking more when we're speaking about vessels, sometimes we look at the body as the vessel and as the soul as the energy. But even in the spirit itself, in the soul itself, there is vessels and there is lights. And the vessels are more the definition of things. And the lights are more the pure energy. Although we're learning over here that the lights also have slight nuances. But still, the main characteristics of things is mostly in the vessel. So the more refined the vessel is, the greater the energy of the soul will be in it. The brighter it is, the coarser. So emotions are far denser than intellect. He's going to explain later. Emotion the more dense something is, the more it feels itself. It's an amazing thing. The denser something is, the more it feels itself. The more refined something is, the less it feels itself, the less it's more in touch with a higher reality. You see, very coarse people are very arrogant in themselves. People that are more refined and elegant, they don't feel themselves. They feel the pain of others. They feel certain truths as more important than themselves. And that's the whole idea of Hasidus, is that we should use our intelligence and become more and more and more refined, so that we should feel God's agendas and God's desires and God's purpose so much more than our own purpose. And that's to the point that we lose all sense of self, of independent self, and we become part of God's purpose. But the point over here is, the denser something is, the more self-aware it is. In emotions in general, even the most sophisticated, holiest emotions have much more of a feeling of I than intellect, as he's going to explain. Because of that, and that's indicative, that symbolizes that emotions are thicker and denser. Therefore, the light of the soul and the light of the soul is less in the emotions than there is in intellect. That's kind of the direction of the discourse. And now let's follow it along. He's going to begin first comparing the two powers of Chachma and Bina, which means within intellect itself, he's going to show how the Chachma is superior to the Bina because Chachma is a more refined vessel. And then he's going to take it to the difference between the intellect and the emotions, and he's going to follow it through all the way down, all the way to the lowest powers of the soul. As he says, the more the vessel is dakos v'ruchnius yoser, meyabar or beribi yoser. There is more light. The light is shining in an increased way. So that's considered higher. Higher meaning more light. And the vessel that is more self, that is more of a mitzius, which means it's more thick and dense and therefore more into its own existence. So what happens? And therefore the light has to be diminished in such a dense vessel. And that's called the lower vessel. And so now he's going to explain. The keli of, once he already established that the more refined the vessel is, the more light can go into it. So he's now going to show how Chachma is higher than Bina. Because again, he's explaining how the 10 Sfirot are in an order of from high to low, where Chachma is the highest point and Malchus is the lowest. So he's going to show how this procession works, how the vessels get coarser as we go down, and as a result of that, the light gets diminished. The vessel of Chachma, is far more refined than the kelim, than the vessels of Bina, of understanding. Like by way of analogy, what is Chachma and Bina? So we discussed it in the past. We'll do it again quickly. When a person is studying any subject, when we're learning, when we're exploring ideas, so there is what we know already, the frame of mind that we have right now. But then when you're learning, when you're trying to gain more insight and more understanding and more profundity and more depth, so you're looking for new ideas. So when you concentrate your mind, let's say, and usually the new idea is necessary when you hit when your old ideas and whatever you've had in your mind has kind of dried up, meaning it's keeping you limited, or you can't move to the next stage, or whatever it is, or you're just studying Torah, and whatever you know and your understanding till now is insufficient to be able to absorb the next piece of Torah, or to be able to make sense of something in Torah that till now it didn't bother you, but right now you're coming up against a brick wall, and based on everything that you know, even a Chassidus, for instance, we all, we're studying over here, and we, Baruch Hashem, have broadened our knowledge by all this study. But we're only in the beginning of the beginning of the beginning of this book, of this exploration. So as we're going to learn, suddenly we're going to hit against certain concepts which are not going to make sense in our head, based on everything that we know, that we think, oh, Baruch Hashem, I'm so smart already, I know so much There's much deeper ideas that we don't know yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to close our eyes and we're going to think deeply. And at a certain point, the way the Chassidus explains, usually what happens is you reach even a point where you get frustrated. And you try and you try and you try till you reach a point where you get frustrated and you almost fall into despair. That's how pained you have to get if you really, really, really want to crack open a new concept, a new idea. And then suddenly, boom, the mind opens up, there is a flash of light, and there is light. You kind of, something opened up. You've seen something, you sense that a whole new, you feel, not just you feel, your mind senses an enlightenment. A flash of insight flashed in your brain. That's the Chachma. Chachma is that first flash. Then, but that's a flash. And sometimes, and then you have to sit on that flash. Sometimes it's there for a second, and then you have to like a bother it, and you have to like re-enter it, and then boom, you can catch it again. And then when you catch it, and then what you're trying to do is you try to start grasping it and holding on to that fresh new light. Sometimes this idea can sit in your head just as a pure kernel of an idea. That's called the Chachma. Chachma is the seed, like a seminal seed from which a child is born. Sometimes the Chachma point can sit in your head for days, and you don't really have the capacity to really develop it in your Bina, which is the analytical side of your mind. But at times you do it quite quickly. Some people are better at it. They can take an idea immediately from their chachma and move it into their more processing plant, where they process the new concept into in the analytical side of the mind, in the left side of the brain, and where you start like unpacking what's there in this point, what's there, what is contained in this point, and there's a whole lot of details in the point. Through this new point, you can answer so many. So now you go, now I understand what I once learned, but I always felt I didn't really understand it. But now I get it. Based on this new understanding, this whole sugya of Torah, this whole part of Torah now makes sense. Now I have so much of a better understanding in this and in this and in that. And suddenly, so this is all opening up. That's what the Bina does. It takes the point of Chachma and uncovers and unpacks all of its details and applies it in all kinds of different avenues and a different thing. And you create an entire world. You build an entire palace. Bina is called a Heichal, it's called a structure, a palace, and Chachma is called a Nekuda. It's called a point. It's a flash. So that's the Chachma and that's the Bina. So he's going to explain now that in the Chachma moment, although the concept is, it's like it says, Vayara Samakai Merachik, you see the place from a distance. It's still far from you. You don't really have it. It's like when someone says to you immediately when you have the flash, like when you're sitting with a chavrusa and you're learning together with a study partner, and suddenly you're both quiet and silent because you come, of course, a part of the Maamor that you're learning, a part of the Gemara or the Tosfos or the passage of the Talmud or the mathematical situation or the scientific exploration or the world of technology. You're trying to come up with a breakthrough in something, how to figure something out. Whatever it is, you're sitting with someone else and suddenly you light up and you jump up and you got it. And someone asks you, what? Tell me. You say, shh, don't bother me now. You can't explain anything. Which means the idea is still very far. That's why we say, Vayaris Hamakom. You see it merachok, from a distance. Mirachok Hashem nirali. God is seen to us from a distance, which means the Chachma experience is a very, very distant experience. But on the other hand, there's a lot of light. It's brilliant. The pleasure, like the sense of the energy that's there is very intense. And then when you start analyzing it and bringing it into the mind, you lose some of that sharpness. And the reason is because the Bina, which is taking the idea and putting it more into definitions, putting it more into words, putting it more into enclothing it, because an abstract idea is exactly that. It's an abstract energy. When you settle it in and you try to fit it into and apply it in its applications, the applications are already we might say limiting it, and so on the one hand, it's settling much more into the person. It's becoming part of who you are and what you are. But on the other hand, it gets diminished when that happens, because the experience of bina, of understanding, which is taking it in from the abstract into the concrete, is a coarser vessel, and automatically the light is never as sharp in the bina as it is in the chachma. That's what he's going to explain over here. When a person has a first flash of an idea, the sichli, this intellectual idea, is still naked, which means it's not yet enclosed in a garment. You haven't enclosed it yet into particulars. You haven't enclosed it yet even into words. That's why the first flash of a light, you don't really hear words, you just see light. Like we see literally, that in that first initial stage, you don't really have much words to it. If there are words, it's a very brief sentence. It's a half a sentence. It's just a couple of words. You don't yet have many letters. You also, maybe it's flashing, this concept flashes, and it's flashing into the subject that you're studying. Because obviously you're studying a particular subject. You're learning a subject, let's say in Chassidus. You're learning the concept of, let's say, or makif and or pnimi, external, encompassing light, and or pnimi and internal light, the subject that we're learning about. And you understand it till now, but it's bothering. Then you think very deeply, and suddenly it really hits you. What's the difference between or makif and or pnimi? So that new brilliant understanding that you have now, right now, that you understand something about the or makif that you never understood till now in the abstract. So this is going to illuminate many. You can apply this in many aspects of life, but right now, it's not yet entering into all the various different avenues. It's relegated in one particular part. Well, let's say it's easier in Chassidus. It's very abstract, but if you're learning Talmud and you're learning a subject in whatever subject it is, in Bari Vishema, Bari Adif, that when someone argues a definite argument and the litigant, the other person says perhaps, maybe, so the person who's arguing with certainty has a certain advantage in believing the person over the person that makes an argument of maybe, a possible argument. So let's say, so you're learning the subject, you understand it, and then there's a depth that you suddenly get, and what's the core? Why is that? What's really the basis of it? And based on this basis, this can be applied to many elements of Torah, not just to the element in this. And it can apply maybe outside of Torah too, in the world of psychology and in the world of understanding people and so on and so forth. Like it can be applied to so many things. So that's all. Once you're applying something, you're locking it into various different schools of thoughts, into different avenues, as opposed to the idea when it's completely in the abstract. So that's what he's saying over here. Number one, it doesn't have words. Number two, it's not right at this moment in the Chachma, it's not entering into many different avenues. It's still just a pure abstract. It has to go into something, because that's probably what you're trying to figure out, but it doesn't have the broadness to resolve 20 different 20 different subjects or realms. It's an abstract idea. Adayin ma'asaga. It's still mufshatas adayin ma'asaga. It's a nekuda that is still mufshat. It's still removed. It's still in the abstract from grasping it. V'hagam, and he questions himself. V'hagam, even though, what do you mean it doesn't have words and it doesn't have all these? In this point lies everything. Eventually, Whatever you're going to take from this brainstorm, you have a brainstorm, and later you're going to create an entire book in which you're going to bring clarity to a person's life, perhaps based on a certain principle that you've just figured out, that can explain, that can help people in the world of business, in their marriages, in their education, in their spiritual life, in their physical life, whatever. I don't know, the person in the world of medicine, you can apply this concept to so many things. It's going to be an entire book. Eventually, obviously, once the book is produced, you're going to see how all these details are all in the point. It's all one point. It's there in the point. So if it's there, why are we saying that it's abstract? It has it all. Yeah, it has it all, but it's not. The first initial point, it has the seed for the illumination into all these subjects, but that's not visibly present in the point. The point is an abstract point. Even though the point includes them all, because all the details that come afterwards, and understanding, everything is coming from the point. Es wird als, he says in Yiddish over here in parentheses, es wird als herausgetragen ma'anakudas haskala, everything is extracted from that point, ma'anakuda, from the point, haskala, of that first initial idea. Hare hanakuda kalelas kala pratim, so the nakuda, the point, includes everything. And here we're saying that because it doesn't have the pratim, because it doesn't have the details, that's why it has such energy, because it doesn't have the details. And here we're saying that the Nakuda has all the details. He explains, of course it has the details. The details are not discernible. All that's discernible is just the point, the major point, the nucleus of it, if you might say. Now, for most people that are not very, very brilliant minds, when they have a breakthrough like this, an idea, they themselves do not know at the time of their breakthrough the details that are in it. Like an average mind, when they have an idea, then the idea appears to be only narrow. It only resolves one particular dilemma, that which they're busy with right now. And they don't even realize how this invention that they invented can be applied to so many different things. So an average mind, but are very wise people who have trained their minds very much. The moment they have a breakthrough, they immediately can see, like, in other words, there is a certain bina element that happens inside the chachma instantly. The chacham gadol, a great scholar, a great wise person, nekadim etzlei la'atzmai, for himself, he recognizes it. Hapratim sheba-nekuda, he kind of can sense very quickly that there's a lot of details in this nekuda. The be'esha noifala haskala chadasha, the time when a haskala chadasha, when a new epiphany flashes in his mind, me'idim etzlei hapratim sheba, it shines by in this person the details. But nevertheless, even by this wise person, he's not focused on it. But primarily, it's the main idea that's shining. Because he has such a bright mind and so sensitive, he picks up on subtleties, but he's definitely not focusing on it. And therefore, he says it's hidden. It's like in the back of his mind. And it's also hovering. It hasn't settled. What's settled in his mind? Only the point itself. Even to himself, it's in a state of concealment, and it's hovering, and compared to the main point, which that is kind of filling his mind with a lot of light. And that which is revealed in his consciousness, fully in his mind, fully in his focus, is only the point of it alone. And he says, and that is definite. One thing is for sure, you don't have a lot of words there. That the words, even if you'll say you can detect, like there's already in his first flash, but he definitely doesn't have, in the literal sense, a bunch of words there at when the epiphany comes. And there's also not, a ton of avenues where the idea is going in. They're definitely not in his mind in the literal sense. Even if there's like it touches upon him, but it's very distant. The primary wise and brilliant person. By most people, it's not at all that way. All you have is just one flash. But this itself means that the vessel, why is there, in this state, there is a lot of light, there's a lot of illumination, because there's not a lot of vessel. See, words, application, that's all considered vessel. This is just very, very refined, pure light. Okay, this needs to be chewed on a little bit more, because today we're just doing the point. And as Hashem, next class, we're going to chew on it a little better, as Hashem, to get. And he's going to compare it to the next stage, which is the Bina, which you don't have any more that powerful sharpness of the idea. As he says, V'alkin, let's just one line, Meir Shama in Yasichli B'yoyser, because it is so fine, the vessel, means there's hardly any vessel there. It's primarily just the essence of, you're allowing the light to be without trying to control the light. Therefore, the sichli is shining. The sharpness of the light is shining very strongly. In a very abstract way, in a very refined way, ve'ili in a very elevated. Okay.